I, 22 and female, used to do DoorDash on the side for some extra cash. This was in the summer of 2018, when it was a little bit newer. At least, in my town it was. Since then, I think they've made a lot of changes, but at the time this happened, it was very unorganized. If you somehow don't know what DoorDash is, it's a food delivery type service, typically for restaurants that don't usually deliver. Think things like McDonald's and such. Anyway, one night I was doing deliveries pretty much all day, so I decided to finish up my last delivery at around 10 p.m. or so. I get an order in, and the person wants a medium cheese and pepperoni pizza and some loaded potato wedges from this pizzeria nearby. I was kind of wondering to myself why they'd order from a pizzeria that delivers anyway, but I figured it was because it was notorious for taking forever when you order for delivery. I accepted the order and headed on over. I got there, picked up the pizza, and confirmed on the app that I'd picked everything up and was on my way. The app notified me of some special instructions the customer had asked for, which was to call them when I arrived outside. Okay, that's not too unusual. Lots of people ask for that so they can come out to meet me. I roll up to the address and find it's downtown. It's a larger apartment-type building. It was completely pitch black as well. Instantly upon approaching, I got an eerie feeling. I pulled up to the curb but stayed in the car. There was no way I was about to go near that building by myself. I called up the number. Luckily, DoorDash has this thing that hides your actual phone number when you call for it. It rung a couple of times, and then this really creepy woman's voice came over the line. "Sorry, we can't get to the phone right now. We're a little bit tied up." Then they started to creepily giggle. The entire time in the background, I could make out what seemed to be another woman screaming. As I focused a bit more, I could hear this person was screaming for help and begging for their life. It got even louder, as if the creepy woman was purposely putting the screaming woman on the phone or something. Instantly, I hung up and drove off, real quick, not even knowing which direction to go in. Luckily, there was a super popular restaurant just a couple of blocks away. I pulled into that parking lot and pulled up the app. I was worried about getting in trouble for not being able to deliver the order. I contacted the help center, and they told me to wait 15 minutes to see if they'd call or message me about their food. Well, they never did call, so thank God for that at least. I was sitting there in the parking lot of the restaurant, telling my mom about this. We agreed that it was probably a prank, but just in case it wasn't, I decided to call the police anyway. I dialed the non-emergency number and told them everything. The police told me they were going to do a wellness check and thanked me for calling them to tell them about it. I went home, but nothing ever came of it. I still think about it from time to time, though. I did get a free pizza and some potato wedges, so that was cool at least. But I really hope that was just a prank or something. I hope the lady screaming in that apartment was safe and okay in the end. This happened last Friday night. I finally arrived home now, and I really need to get this off my chest. My friend's family owns a pretty big house in a rural area in my state, where they spend most holidays and some vacations. They also own an apartment a few blocks away from where I live downtown. His folks usually go there about once a month to check the maintenance and see if there's any mail. Since we're having a pandemic though, they're not going out to do so as much anymore. My friend rang me up and asked if I could join with him. He said he'd need an extra pair of hands. It was about a 4.5-hour drive or so. He came here to pick me up and we left around 3 p.m. due to his work. We arrived and parked the car and we went to check the house. It was already too dark to check the surroundings. The house itself seemed fine. We had a couple of beers, watched some old DVDs, and made a frozen pizza we'd taken with us before we went to bed. Sometime during the night, though, we heard a loud noise coming from the front door. We were both awoken by this noise and went over to check. It was firmly closed just as we'd left it. We decided to further check the house, though, and see if something was up. I must add that this house has a door connecting the kitchen to the garage, which has only 2 lamps near that door. Just as we were about to enter, my friend suddenly stopped me, his eyes shooting wide open. Before I could even verbally confirm what was wrong, I heard the sound of someone breathing loudly. I looked over to the car and was stunned with surprise when I locked eyes with somebody hiding behind it. Immediately, we ran back inside and locked the garage door tight. I went to call the cops, and he snatched up a knife. The cops came, searched the garage, and found a backpack with a hatchet and duct tape. They said it was probably someone who knew the friend's parents' routine, maybe worked for them in the past or something. Clearly, they were getting ready to attack them. The door had not been forced open, and that indicated that this person had been there before and knew exactly how to get in. They'd escaped by breaking a window in the garage. We gave our statements, of course, and stayed up all night after. We called his parents in the morning. We even had to stay there while the window and locks were being replaced. Needless to say, we could not get out of there fast enough. I'm a waitress at a local Italian restaurant that also does deliveries and pickups. One day, I would say maybe a year ago or so, a man came in to place a carry-out order. A girl I work with noticed him walking up to the door and asked me if I would take care of him. I said yes, not really thinking anything of it, and she walked back into the kitchen. Once he came in, I could see immediately why she'd asked me to deal with him instead. He immediately gave me the creeps. He was an older man, short and stout, wearing a big coat and a winter hat. He absolutely reeked like someone who smoked an entire pack of cigarettes while walking through piles of cow dung. Even thinking of it now in my apartment all alone, I can still smell that smell. What really scared me though was the way he stared into my face, chin turned down towards his chest, looking up at me through his eyebrows. His stare made me feel like he was thinking of every possible way to torture me or something. He didn't say much, just sort of growled his order at me. He paid and waited behind the counter for his pizza to take home. He would pace with his hands locked behind his back, never shaking that stare. Even when he would turn to pace the other way, he never tore his glance away from me, not even for a single second. He didn't even blink. Being that I was working behind the counter, I couldn't really go anywhere in case someone called or came in to get their order. So I had to just stand there, watching the clock tick, waiting for his order to be done so he could finally leave. Once he was gone, I asked my coworker if she knew anything else about him and why she'd wanted me to take care of him so badly. She told me he really gave her the creeps. He was apparently a registered sex offender, but never went into the full details of his charges. Honestly, I didn't want to know either. I still thought about him for the rest of the day, and even looked twice before getting into my car at the end of the night. Soon enough, though, I forgot all about him. Unfortunately, that would not be the last time I saw him. He began to come in very frequently after. At first, maybe only once every other week, then every single week, then every day. Every time he would order the exact same thing and begin his pacing with his unblinking, burning stare. Every chance I could, I would run into the kitchen or get away from the counter with any excuse I could find. My coworkers all began to make jokes about how much he liked me, saying he'd never stared that hard at another woman working there before. The jokes obviously didn't make me feel any better. The jokes halted altogether though when we began to notice a pattern. We noticed the only days he would come in would be the days when I was working. We started to suspect that he recognized my car. I never had the same schedule, but I always parked in the same spot in our very open lot. Because of this, you would always be able to tell it was my car if you knew so. The shifts that I would work were a little bit strange too. There was a very, very dead time of day where we cut half the staff, giving us breaks that were a couple of hours long. On those days, he would come in twice a day if I was working. He would come in while I would work my morning shift, then come in again for my evening shift. While it could have just been a crazy coincidence, nonetheless, it began to freak me the fuck out. One night, after working a double shift on Saturday, I had walked out to my old beat-up car, which I almost never locked. 3 out of the 4 doors on my car were broken in some way because it was so old, so it was easiest to just keep it unlocked at all times. I can admit the car was such an old shitbox that no one would ever dare steal it. Maybe it wouldn't even be possible to steal it, so I never really worried about it. That was until this particular night. I was just climbing into my car when I immediately noticed a familiar stench. My car reeked exactly like that man. That same distinct smell of non-menthol cigarettes and cow shit was all around me. I was convinced that man had been in my car that day. After that, I had to have someone escort me to my car every night for a while. I haven't seen that man since last year, but I still get chills just thinking about him. This happened just over 2 years ago, at the end of my first year of university. I'm a woman, and at the time I was 21 years old. My university is in a very large city, and I was living in university accommodation, a short walk away from the main campus. My flatmates had all finished up their exams and gone home for the summer, so I was there all alone in my flat. I was pretty stressed out, because I was in the middle of my first round of university exams. I decided that it wouldn't be prudent to waste my precious study time cooking, so instead I ordered a large pizza from a large pizza chain. It was about 8:30 in the evening when my pizza arrived, so just on the verge of getting dark. My block of flats had a keycard entry system, so the pizza delivery guy couldn't just come right to my door. I saw his car pull up outside. As I mentioned, this is a fairly big chain, so their cars were easily recognizable. I went downstairs to go get my pizza. The delivery man stepped out of his car as I walked over. He was tall, stocky, and looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s. He handed me the box. "Oh, thanks," I said, and made to walk away. The delivery guy, however, seemed to have other ideas. "Hey, you're really pretty," he called out to me. I wasn't sure how to respond, so instead I just said thanks again. Then, most disconcertingly, he asked this. "Are you home alone? It sure looks like it." This set off my creep alarm right away, so I told him I was not. Clearly though, my order was meant for only one person. I was in a largely deserted block of flats at the very end of the school year as well. He deduced pretty easily that I was lying. I was thoroughly creeped out at this point, so I turned around to walk back to the door of my flat block. As I walked away, he wolf whistled and called after me. "Wow, nice ass. Want to have some fun?" As I walked up the steps, he continued to whistle, whoop, and follow behind me. Needless to say, I closed the door in his face and locked the door to the block of flats, then the door to my flat, then the door to my room as well. Had this happened more recently, I would have called the pizza place right away to report the incident. At the time, though, I was not in the best state of mind, so instead I ate my pizza and put the whole incident in the back of my mind. I felt pretty uneasy about the fact this guy now knew where I lived. Moreover, the other residents of my flat block were wont to let strangers in easily, which made me even more uneasy. The next few days passed without further incident. I finished up my exams and went back to my parents' house for the summer. When I arrived home, I decided at last that I ought to call the pizza place and report this creepy employee. I did so, and the young woman who answered the phone sounded horrified when I explained the situation to her. She immediately handed the phone over to a manager. He took the details of my order, presumably so he could ascertain who delivered the pizza, and apologized profusely. When I heard back from the pizza delivery place, they said no one by that description even worked there. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late out, past 1:30 or 2 a.m. I believe. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we'd gotten home, he tossed me out onto our front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I'd worn to the party, and it was freezing out that night. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, my purse, and my wallet in the house with him, so all I could do was sit on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both outside and inside, I knew he was not going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. Instead, I decided I would try to walk to this gas station and motel less than a mile away so I could use their phone to try and call a girlfriend of mine and see if I could sleep over with her instead. Ironically enough, the road I was walking on, Donner Pass Road, was so freezing cold that it was fitting. But anyway, a little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stop and begin to make a U-turn. My heart began to pound fiercely. I froze up and forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me, and this guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late at night. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station, and she was expecting me quite soon. He smiled and offered me a ride. I said no thank you, citing that I didn't like to hitchhike. Well, that's good. I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though. You just look like someone who needs some help. He kept on driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep. He pulled out what looked to be a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I got to where I was headed to safely. I was very naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials. When he offered me a ride again, I said it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far anyway. He popped the door open and I hopped in. The radio was down low. It was a little bit messy inside. The ashtray was full of cigarettes, and there were tons of newspapers lining the passenger floor. I was moving my feet when some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight-colored bandana, and some various other garbage. He apologized, saying it was a truck he took out hunting, but it was super warm, so I was happy for that. And I didn't mind the mess at all. He told me his name was John. He asked why I was so scantily dressed without a jacket. I started to tell him about the party and the fight I'd been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even joked that he could go back and arrest my boyfriend right now if I wanted. I asked him about himself, and he told me about his family. He was a young dad, had a wife, daughter, a son, a dog. I told him it sounded like he had the perfect little family. He laughed and said he certainly did. It sort of clicked for me to ask him if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save up his battery as it was about to die. We were approaching the gas station when all of a sudden he just drove right past it. "Oh, I think that's the one, you just missed it." But he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach. My heart began to pound. I started getting choked up, and my eyes started tearing up as I looked out the windows. I watched the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured out, asking if he could please turn around. Instead, he ignored me. As I looked over to him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed over. I looked back out the window and down the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remembered always hearing never go to the second location. I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle and how it would be so much harder to get away with only one foot as opposed to two. I was debating with myself. Sure, there was snow on the ground, but then again, snow can be hard, especially when you're not fully clothed. I felt so dumb. I wasn't even tied up or anything, but I still couldn't do anything. There was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us two. I was crying pretty badly at this point and asked him to please borrow his phone. He told me to shut up and stop talking. He then started talking under his breath. "Girls shouldn't be out so late, you know. You shouldn't have been out alone. Look what you're doing to me, dressed up like a slut." He kept saying these terrible things to me. I wasn't even responding. I was just crying, trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remembered the pair of handcuffs underneath my feet, so I used a little scooping motion to try and pick them up. I used it to push them under the bottom of my seat as far as I could. I was thinking of different ways I could try and help myself. If we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures perhaps, maybe I could grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them. Maybe I could get the attention of a cop passing by or something, swerve and grab the wheel so he would appear to be a drunk driver and pull us over. I even had the thought that maybe this man was just having a weird night. How I didn't want to do anything to hurt him, but I told myself that sort of thinking got me into this mess in the first place. He pulled off the road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooded trees were closer to the road. On mine, there was a small gap fully covered in thick snow, just before the tree line. He turned off the car and coldly said there was something wrong with the engine and to get out right now. He grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car. I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded for him to not make me get out with him because it was too cold with what I had on. He turned to face me, door still open, and shouted at me to get out right now. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console. I was crying. "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I'd ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He stared at me in this way I can't even begin to describe. I wouldn't even know how to start. He climbed back in the car. I slinked back toward my window, scared he would simply drag me out by force. He turned off the headlights, and everything went dark. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years. He lit up a cigarette and looked out his window, then back at me. He could hear the newspaper shuffling on the ground as I was adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window, he asked me if I thought about running. He told me if I did, he had a quick way to get me exactly where he wanted me. Oddly enough, I had been thinking of running just minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car, I should definitely stay inside. Otherwise, he'd simply chase me or shoot me. I think at that point, I finally hit the reserve of my courage, and instead of panic, there was simply numbness and exhaustion. There was still an occasional tear or two, but I just went completely numb. It was dead quiet. But finally, I just barely audibly told him that my friend was still waiting for me. I asked about his wife and children. He very plainly told me he didn't have either, and that his house was simply empty. I asked him what he was thinking about. "I'm thinking about what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily though. He just said it coldly, which sort of scared me more. I started getting worked back up and crying. At that point, he told me not to cry anymore and turned the car on, offering me some heat. I told him all I wanted to do was go home. Eventually, he started driving. He kept driving until we approached a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he slowed down. While pulling up to the station, he told me not to tell anyone or he would come back for me. Then he told me all he was doing was teaching me a lesson to not hitchhike with strangers. He almost came to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changed his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I had already thrown myself out of the truck and was sprinting toward the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but I stopped and remembered to try and see his license plate at the very least. I turned around and only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk behind the counter to call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little bit scared I would see John once more. My fears melted away though when the new-faced policeman arrived. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I'd caught, and the fact he said he was an off-duty cop. Basically, any information I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera. The officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I would be able to look as well. The officer said no, and asked if I didn't trust him. He then gave me a ride to my friends, lecturing me for hitchhiking. This mostly consisted of him asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. He told me I was naive to think it could never happen to me. I never heard anything back about the report I'd made. I would try to follow up, but each time I did, they would simply ignore me, all aside from a single time when they told me my case number didn't even exist. All that didn't stop me from trying to follow up though. Throughout the months and years, I asked my friend whose home I slept over at that one night if she'd ever heard of any weird things or anything like that since that incident happened. If anyone up there had ever said anything about it. She always said no though. I sort of let it go and tried to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with the case. I never heard any other odd experiences up there, so maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. Sometimes, though, I think I tell myself all of that to help me sleep better at night. It was all so real. Even if it wasn't real, though, I'm glad I didn't get out of that car into the woods that night.